Good afternoon, everybody, and once again, a very warm welcome to the Grand Salon. Thank you for joining us for our next afternoon lecture. Andrew is a liveryman of the City of London, the major financial services and insurance centre. He is an international corporate executive with a high reputation for leading change in a multicultural environment. And he is a very popular member of our Seabourn Conversationalist team, and we're very fortunate once again to have him on board Seabourn Quest. So I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of the wonderful Mr. Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Amy. And Amy, thank you for you and the team for everything you do to help coordinate and to ensure that we're there and things work. It makes the whole job so much more rewarding. Thank you to all of you for joining me as well this afternoon. I'm going to mention one man who decided to challenge the view of Christopher Columbus that was taught in particularly American schools for generations, and some of the people who challenge his challenges. I'm going to look at Columbus's successes. I'm going to look at his failures, because he didn't actually manage to achieve what he set out to do, but he did make a major contribution to the changes in the world today. It's a fascinating story, and it's a story that is changing. This evening on Spanish television, in about an hour's time, there is a program to be broadcast that we are told will prove where Christopher Columbus came from. Now, we tend to assume that he came from Genoa in Liguria in Italy. We'll see what their view of that is. More of that to come. Now, if you've been with me before, you may remember that I am easily amused by some of the signs and messages that you see around the place. So humour me just for a minute while I share a couple with you. Because I have a feeling if you were a cyclist and you saw that sign there, you'd probably work out that there were signs in the way, blocking your way through. Or I think you probably might question, was it really important to close the gate? Or are we seriously worried about cattle and sheep straying through that gate? I don't know. And maybe it's just me, but I wouldn't try sitting on this fence anyway. But back to the story of today. This is just an image of a seabourn itinerary, one of the world cruises of the last year's world cruise. Seabourn sails all over the world in these beautiful ships, and we get to touch on a lot of places that have been impacted by the explorers. And indeed, we even follow in some of their routes and some of their paths. Where we are now is an important part of the history, the story of exploration, although Columbus himself didn't get anywhere up. He got up to Greenland and Iceland earlier on in his career, but he didn't get over to the Canadian Maritimes. The person I mentioned who challenges things is a man called Gavin Mingott. He is a British amateur historian, and he wrote a book, 1421, the year China discovered America. And he uses this map as his proof that China made its way across the North Pacific to North America, beating Columbus by about 70 years. Well, the map has been proved to be a 19th century creation and not a Chinese original creation. However, there is a lot of evidence that the Chinese were out there with some quite large fleets sailing the Pacific and Indian Ocean. So it is quite possible that they were there in the early part of the 15th century, before Columbus's time. It is possible, but we don't actually have any proof. And we do know that America, if we talk about the whole of America from Churchill down to Punta Arenas in the south of South America, we know that a number of people have discovered or set foot on the soil of the countries that form America today. Generations were taught that this man, Christopher Columbus, was the man who discovered America. Well, we now understand that numerous people, adventurers, explorers, were on the soil of the American continent, including Kathy's Viking ancestors. There is early Semitic and Irish DNA in this part of the world that precedes Columbus by several hundred years. The Irish we can sort of understand because the Vikings enslaved Irish people. They had a major slave market in Dublin, and they took those people all over the place. It was one of the first European diasporas. The Semitic DNA is more difficult to understand because, if anything, it probably predates that time, in which case it's likely they could only have got there centuries ago on across frozen territory. But that is a subject for consideration for the future. So what we believe at the moment, and the program that we will be following through on Spanish TV tonight might disprove this theory, but what we believe at the moment is that Christopher Columbus was a wool merchant son from Italy. We believe that he was born in Genoa sometime in 1451. He was born as the house in which Kathy and I live today was being built in 1451. He conceived the enterprise of the Indies. And in 1484, as a result of his own voyages from Iceland down to Guinea in West Africa, he believed that there was an economic imperative to head west to reach the Indies in the Pacific Ocean. He thought if he just headed straight across the Atlantic, that's where he would end up. And for some years, that's where he thought he had ended up. Christopher Columbus, as we call him in Italian, is Cristoforo Colombo. In Spanish, he is Cristobal Colón. And there are many squares in many towns across Spain and the Spanish-speaking world that are Plaza Colóns. Our own town in Spain where we lived had a Plaza Colón. Buenos Aires has a Plaza Colón, and it has an Avenida Cristobal Colón as well, which leads to it. No, not all governments want to be too closely associated with Christopher Columbus these days. And ex-President Cristina Kirchner of Argentina removed the monument to Colón for repairs, and she intended to have it replaced by a statue of herself and to rename the square Plaza Kirchner while she was out of office before she could do that. The statue has been reinstated, and the Plaza Colón has been redesignated as the Plaza Puerto Argentino. I showed this map yesterday, and possibly even the day before. It demonstrates one of the reasons why people wanted to find alternative ways to the sources of products in Asia, in Far Asia. Spices, porcelains, tapestries, silks, and so on. And let me try to explain why that is. If you look here, this is Venice in the north of Italy, the hub of the Venetian Republic. And everywhere on this map that is marked in red was owned or controlled by Venice. So all of those yellow waters, you had to sail through them because they were controlled by the red ports. To sail through them, you had to pay duty to the Venetian Republic. The Silk Route brought goods in through what we know as Turkey today, particularly through Constantinople, or Istanbul as we know it today, which of course is just here. Now that means you had to traverse the Ottoman Empire and the Venetian Republic, and you were paying taxes to both. Marco Polo, back in the day, decided that he wanted to try to eliminate some of the on-costs of trading with the Far East. And so instead of goods coming from one Chinese town to another and being traded with a markup and then onto another Chinese town and then onto somewhere in Mongolia and then onto somewhere in one of the stans and constantly having markups applied, he decided he wanted to buy goods and ship them straight back to Europe. Now that wasn't so easy to do in those days because you still either had to avoid the Ottoman Empire and the Venetian Republic or pay them duty for it. So they pretty much had it sewn up, and the people like the Counts of Catalonia, those based in Barcelona, the Counts of Genoa, had to pay duty to the Venetian Republic to be able to trade, and both were major trading republics. As a teenager, Columbus went to sea. He travelled extensively. He swam into Portugal in 1476 after his ship was sunk in battle, and he made Portugal his base for a while. There is, at least until we watch this programme later on, no reason to believe that he had any Portuguese blood in him, but Portugal was his home. And he went to the king and put to him a proposal that they should fund his mission to the Orient. They rejected it. They rejected it because they were already exploiting routes down the west side of Africa and in a firm belief that they could get round what we now know as Cape Horn and into the Indian Ocean. They hadn't yet proved it, but they were getting closer and closer to it. So Lisbon said no. And when this failed, he went to the French court, he went to the Genoese, he went to the English courts, royal courts, to look for funding. He went to the companies of the City of London, asking them for funding to do this mission, and was rejected again. And finally, when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain created their union between Castile and Aragon, they agreed that they would support him. The Catholic kings of Spain agreed to fund his mission. And on the 3rd of August, 1492, Columbus and his fleet of 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, set sail across the Atlantic. I happen to believe that there is no coincidence in the fact that that date, the 3rd of August, 1492, was the date that the Jews were expelled from Spain under the Inquisition. I think this was a case of hiding news for the better publicity that the court wanted to achieve. But it's as it is. It is what happened. 10 weeks later, land was sighted, and on the 12th of October, Columbus and a group of his men set foot on an island in what was later to become known as the Bahamas. The 12th of October. Today is the 12th of October. And so I purposely chose today to be the day on which I introduce you to Christopher Columbus. Now, he believed that he had reached the Indies, what we now know as the East Indies. He believed that he had sailed effectively halfway around the world. And as a result, he dubbed the natives Indians. And that's how the nomenclature, Indians, for the natives of North America came to be used. Initially, the encounters were quite friendly, but the indigenous people all over the New World were soon to be devastated by their contacts with these Europeans. Columbus landed on a number of other islands in the Caribbean, including what we now know as Cuba and Hispaniola. And he returned to Spain. He returned to Spain in triumph. When he got back from his first voyage, he called into Lisbon to speak to the king, King João, and to say, "You were wrong, I was right, I got to the Indies, and I brought back all of these goods for the King and Queen of Spain, and I've claimed this land for them." He wasn't aware that there was an agreement between Spain and Portugal that meant that anything north of a particular line would belong to one country and south would belong to the other in new explorations. And the places he'd discovered, technically under that agreement, should have been claimed by Portugal. So there was quite a to-do as a result. And we'll talk about what became of that. But when he got back to Barcelona at the end of the voyage, the king and queen, the Catholic kings of Spain, were there to receive him. And they sat him at their right-hand side, the seat of honor. All of the honors and the titles that were promised to him were confirmed. This was the absolute height of Columbus's glory. And in the Plaza Colón in Barcelona, Columbus looks down today on every ship and boat coming in and out of the harbour. This column stands at the end of Las Ramblas, the central artery of the city. There is a lift to a viewing platform at the top of the statue. He was made Admiral of the Seven Seas, Viceroy of the Indies, and within a few months he set off on a second and larger voyage to find gold and to capture more Indians as slaves. It's interesting that the slave trade across the Atlantic started by bringing natives from the Americas back to Europe. He covered more territory, but people started to question whether he really had discovered what he had set out to discover. This was his ensign. The cross in the center was the one that he flew on his first voyage, and the F and the Y are the initial letters of Ferdinand and Isabella, the king and queen of the new Spain. He made a further couple of voyages to the newfound territories. He suffered quite a bit of defeat and humiliation on the way. On his third voyage, this was between 1498 and 1500, he sailed further south. He touched Trinidad and Venezuela. And in 1500, Pedro Alvarez Cabral discovered and claimed the lands of Brazil for Portugal. And that is why Brazil to this day speaks Portuguese. He wasn't alone at this stage, of course, there's another whole talk in here, but there were others who wanted to stretch and check and find, but he did pave the way. On his final voyage, this frankly excellent navigator, not a very good administrator, and not always very good to the people whose lands he discovered. In fact, he was accused of mismanagement. He didn't achieve his stated ambition. He convinced the king that one more voyage would bring all of the riches that he had promised. And he went on what would be his fourth and last voyage in 1502, traveling along the eastern coast of Central America in an unsuccessful mission to find the route to the Indian Ocean. A storm wrecked one of his ships, stranding the captain and the sailors on the island of Cuba. Local islanders, tired of Spain's poor treatment and their obsession with gold, which the locals didn't understand, refused to give them food. So in a spark of inspiration, in a trick that was later used by James Cook and others as well, he threatened to punish them by taking away the moon. He was able to do that because he knew there was a lunar eclipse due. They didn't believe him. When the lunar eclipse happened, they immediately conceded, granted him what he wanted, and he arranged for the return of the moon. In 1504, this lunar eclipse alarmed the natives so much that they stood back and re-established trade. They allowed a rescue party sent by the royal governor of Hispaniola, the big island of Haiti and the Dominican Republic today. And in July, Columbus and his men were taken back to Spain. They arrived there in November 1504. He died about 18 months later in 1506. He was a very wealthy man, but he was very disappointed because he knew that he hadn't achieved what he told everyone he was going to. He died in Valladolid in Spain. His sons Diego and Ferdinand, his brother Diego, and a few of his shipmates were at the bedside when a priest said the final mass, and the great explorer was heard to say that into God's hands he commended his spirit. After the funeral at Valladolid, he was buried in the Carthusian monastery of Santa Maria de las Cuevas in Seville. The body was exhumed in 1542 and taken to Santo Domingo in the Caribbean. It remained there until the island was ceded to the French in the 1790s, and then it was moved again to Havana in Cuba. And after the Spanish-American War of 1898 and Spain's loss of Cuba, Columbus's remains were, it is believed, returned to Spain and buried in Seville Cathedral. In Santo Domingo, they claim that he is still there. This is the tomb in Seville Cathedral, and just this week it has been confirmed that his body is in that tomb. I don't understand how they've done that. I'm not a scientist. But there is believed to be absolute certainty now that the remains of Christopher Columbus are buried in that tomb in Seville Cathedral. So the Italian explorer, who used to be lauded by school children as the first American hero, was a great explorer, there's no doubt about that. And at the time, he was welcomed on his return with enormous respect. Now he is being attacked by Native American groups and others as a founding father of colonialism and slavery. His critics point out that he never actually made it to mainland North America, let alone to the islands and countries of Asia. He believed he was somewhere else. The Americas, we've tended to assume that the Americas were underpopulated when the Europeans arrived. In fact, there were tens of millions of native inhabitants in the Americas, often in really sophisticated cities. If you think about some of the Inca ruins that have been uncovered, for example. Within 130 years of the Europeans appearing on the coastlines with their diseases of smallpox, measles and flu, it's estimated that 95% of the indigenous people were killed, were wiped out. Today, replicas of his fleet are to be found in numerous harbours around the world. In our little town in Spain, the Plaza Colón, the square named after this man, is accessed by any of three streets: the Calle Niña, the Calle Pinto, and the Calle Santa Maria, named after the three ships that were in his first fleet. And today, and I do mean today, the 12th of July, is the day, 12th of October, sorry, I'm getting a shake of the head from over there. The 12th of October is celebrated as Columbus Day in lots of Italian cities. It's celebrated in Spain, in cities with strong Italian or Spanish connections throughout the Americas. Often it's been regularized. Our friends in Boston will be celebrating on Monday. That's a public holiday there, and that's true of a number of other places. But the Latin spirit is strong, and everywhere the day brings fun. In Spain, we don't talk about Columbus Day. In Spain, we celebrate La Dia de la Hispanidad, the day of Hispanic culture. It's a national holiday today, and it commemorates the date on which Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colón, first set foot on the Americas on behalf of the Spanish crown. There's always a big special parade on the day in the Plaza Colón in Madrid. The military are there, the king is there, there are many guests, there are flypasts, and it's a day of enormous national pride, and that pride extends well beyond the story of Christopher Columbus. The discovery of America was so important to Spain because this is what started the expansion of the Spanish language and culture across the newly found world, and it is what broke them free of the constraints of the Venetian Republic. In Latin America, the holiday is often celebrated under the name of Dia de la Raza, the day of race, or Dia de las Culturas, the day of the cultures, and I heard just now in Mexico it can be celebrated as La Dia de la Hispanidad, as it is back in Spain. In Brazil, Discovery Day is a completely different celebration. That's observed in April each year because that is the date when Pedro Álvares Cabral became the first European to land in Brazil in 1500. Mind you, even that's contested by many. So let's go back to to Columbus, and have a little look at his legacy. There are monuments to this man everywhere. This is the one in Columbus Circle in Manhattan. Quite a few of you will probably have seen it. You may not have realized what it was when you were there last weekend. But the traffic, when it's moving, circulates around this man. And it's very similar, if you can remember the one I showed you in Barcelona, very similar sort of monument. Or there's the Christopher Columbus Memorial, the fountain in front of Union Station, in Washington, D.C., officially inaugurated on June the 8th in 1912. There was such a big celebration there that it was reckoned to be bigger than the inauguration of a president. The Italian-American community in Iowa donated this monument to the state in 1938. He didn't get to Iowa. He didn't get to North America, but he is celebrated all the way through. This one is in Marconi Plaza in South Philadelphia, and there's been a lot of reaction. The reason that the bottom right photo has the statue covered up is just to protect it against protesters. He's also well represented in South America. This is in El Prado in La Paz, Bolivia. But think of some of the places that he didn't go to where his name or his presence is related. Colombo in Sri Lanka, for example. A long, long way from anywhere he got to, even though I guess it was the sort of area that he was aiming to get to in the first place. He rates a place in Mexico City. This monument is located in one of the roundabouts of the Paseo de la Reforma and was paid for by King Leopold I, King of the Belgians, and his son-in-law, Emperor Maximilian. This chapel at El Templet in Havana was built in his honor, and he did actually set foot on the soil of the island that we now know as Cuba. In Lisbon, where we sail in and out of quite often, their adopted son is quite well represented too, far more times than I can show you on the screen. And this memorial stands in the Jardines de Murillo in Seville, in Spain. There are effectively two types of Columbus-related memorials. Those with a direct relation to the places where they are erected, and those without. The first group, they're the most logical. You can see the logic, you can see the reason and the connection. An important person is honoured in places where the events in his life took place. And we find these memorials principally in three main areas. In Italy, particularly the Ligurian coast, where, at least till we watch this program later on, we believe he came from. In Spain, especially in the Costa del Sol, from where he sailed. The Costa del Sol, Andalusia, calls itself the cradle of the discovery of America. And in Barcelona, to where he returned. And the third main area is in the West Indies, where he did touch a number of islands. There are 151 memorials to him in this group. For the second group, the location has no direct relationship with Columbus per se. Generally speaking, the reason for such monuments is much more symbolic. It concerns Latin America, from Mexico to Argentina, and the United States of America. And there are 242 monuments in this area. So a total of very nearly 400 monuments to Christopher Columbus. On the 2nd of October 1881, a small group of men met in the basement of St. Mary's Church on Hill House Avenue in New Haven, Connecticut. They were called together by their 29-year-old parish priest, Father Michael J. McGivney. These men formed a society that one day would become what they describe as the world's largest Catholic family fraternal service organization. I said that in this very room a couple of years ago, and the Catholic priest on board walked up to me afterwards and said, "It is not a Catholic society." I tell you what they said themselves. And we found a thriving community in Manila just last year, attached to the Catholic Church there. They sought strength in solidarity, and they have done a lot of work to support families in need. His name lives on in places too. This is Columbus, Ohio, located about, within 550 miles or 900 kilometers of half of the population of the United States. And it is used as a test base for a lot of new product marketing. Columbus has the nickname Arch City because of these originally wooden, now steel arches across the high street. Colón, based on the Spanish version of his name, is a seaport on the Caribbean seacoast of Panama, and the city lives near the Atlantic entrance to the Panama Canal. It's capital of Panama's Colón province and has traditionally been known as Panama's second city. And so it is just here at the Atlantic end of the Panama Canal. But while I've got that map up there, let me just refer to this star, because the star marks the only place that I'm aware of where you can stand in the Americas and watch the sun rise over the Pacific and set over the Caribbean. Because from there, the Pacific is to your east and the Caribbean is to your west, just because of that S-shaped kink in the territory. There are lots of cities named after him. I mentioned Columbus, Ohio, the District of Columbia, where Washington is to be found, is named after him as well. There's even a whole country that takes his name, Colombia, in South America, from the Italian version of this name. 26th largest country in the world, the 4th largest country in South America, after Brazil, Argentina, and Peru, with an area more than twice the size of France. In Colombia, many of you may have been to the port of Cartagena, which is a very popular port, a very important port in terms of colonial access and development. This monument is, with Kathy showing it off is in the Plaza de Coches in Cartagena. Colombia is the 3rd largest Spanish-speaking population in the world, after Mexico and Spain. The explorers were followed by traders and by educators. The Jesuits from Iberia introduced formal education that is still the foundation for school and college life in large parts of Latin America to this day. What other legacies do we have from the discoveries of Christopher Columbus and his fellow explorers? Well, I showed a version of this map yesterday. It aims to demonstrate what arrived in Europe from the Americas that we probably wouldn't have found had we not found America. And I repeat, I'm talking about the continent of America, not an individual country. And the things that ended up in America from Europe. So, for example, going across to Europe, we have tobacco, quinine, turkeys, pumpkins, and squashes, sweet potato, pineapples, cocoa beans, and various other produce through to corn and vanilla. Going the other way, from Africa and Europe to the Americas, we have coffee beans, peaches, pears, apples, citrus fruits, bananas from the Atlantic islands, onions and things. A host of new grains, quite a large array of livestock, and grapes, that's important. But diseases as well, smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles, malaria, diphtheria, whooping cough, none of which were known in the New World until we got there. What are the other legacies of Columbus? Well, if he hadn't discovered the Americas, and no one else did, and I think we can all accept that's very, very unlikely, but I think you'd agree with that. If he hadn't discovered the Americas and no one else did, Walter Raleigh would not have found tobacco and brought it back to the court of Queen Elizabeth. Neither would we have potatoes or other countless fruit and vegetables, some of which I've just mentioned to you. We wouldn't have the range of wines that we have today. In fact, our choice of wines could be very severely limited today were it not for the New World, because when phylloxera struck the vineyards of France in the end of the 19th century, healthy vines were exported to California, to South America, to South Africa, to Australia, New Zealand. And if that hadn't happened, at least one grape variety, the Carmenere, would have disappeared completely, likely many others as well. And if adventurers hadn't discovered new lands, they wouldn't have discovered new peoples or provided new opportunities for others to relocate. And in my opinion, our world would be far less diverse than it is today. And that diversity brings with it many novelties, and some of them, many of them, are beneficial. I'm not so sure about this. This is the Chicago stuffed deep pan pizza, which I don't think would ever have been invented in Italy. But Chicago has become a wonderful culinary melting pot. Some of the best westernized Chinese cuisine in the world, Japanese restaurants with a broad spectrum of flavors. And in 1895, Berghoff, one of the best Teutonic restaurants anywhere, was opened in Chicago. Supermarket shelves are stocked with foods and ingredients from around the world. No matter where you are, in the developed world at least, there is no shortage of a range of foods to be had. In fact, it gets increasingly difficult to spot the difference between one supermarket and another. Perhaps the most important legacy is the ethnic blend. So as I've demonstrated, unfortunately, it led to the death of many native peoples, but an influx of many Europeans and Africans, which was seen in much of the Americas, gives some of the most thorough ethnic blends in the world. It's demonstrated in the music and broader cultures. Carnival in Rio as an example, where European, African and American native cultures blend together, and it's difficult at times to see where one stops and another starts. And of course, television gives us access to a difficult to define source for a lot of the programs that are around, bringing the continents much closer together. Latin American soaps are standard viewing in Spanish homes today, with the result that Castellano, the traditional Spanish language, is being corrupted, constantly being corrupted. And that's just as true of English, with corruptions from United States, and with the US language being corrupted by English, because of the programs that we all watch across. Just one example, a computer, what I'm currently working from here, in Castellano, in the Spanish that we speak, would be known as an ordinadora, similar to the French ordinateur. Whereas in most of Latin America, it would be called una computadora, a corruption from the American use of computer rather than ordinateur. In the UK, we have channels dedicated exclusively to production from North America. And as a result, we have an amazing choice of programs to watch. The United States, the 20th century world power. But what's going to happen to places like Argentina, Chile, or Brazil? Where will they be ranking at the end of this century in comparison to the United States and Europe and China? It's very difficult to know. And will the global powers of the future be nations at all? Or will it be the successors to Amazon and Google and who knows? So all in all, did these discoveries make a positive contribution to society today? Well, I'm going to leave that question with you to consider. I have one more talk, which is in 2 days' time, and I'm going to be looking at the story of the great ocean liners and the race for speed across the oceans. And Halifax comes back into that story, as does Montreal. So I hope you will join me for that in 2 days' time back here. We have all sorts of other things planned, I know. I'm very happy to take any questions. I am well aware that the Seabourn 6 have a session in here in half an hour, and obviously they'll need a bit of time to set up for that. So if there are any questions, I will take them, but I may have to say, let's take them outside. We'll see how our time goes. If not, thank you very much.